So Paul, he's writing to the church in Ephesus, and he says this. He's talking about our identity. It's actually part of what Lauren was saying. He's like, I've got all of this in heaven for you. I've set it up since the beginning of the foundation of the world. In fact, I'm going to blow your minds with my goodness. And then it says that we're actually seated with Christ in heavenly places. Here's what that means, that you have incredible authority given to you from God in the places that he's placed you. And it goes on to say, you've heard this one before, it's Ephesians 2:10, that you are God's workmanship. Say workmanship. Here's what it means. You are like nobody else. There is nobody like you. You are this custom-made masterpiece. And then it says this, created in Christ Jesus. That's really good news. For good works, which he has prepared in advance for you. So the reason why I wanted Aurelia to share that story is because of this. Now, if we as a church developed a plan to reach San Marcos and said, hey, we're going after postpartum moms, I don't fit that role very well. That's not a ministry that I would be very successful in. But for Aurelia, there is this custom-made grace on her life, then initiated by the Holy Spirit that sparks something. And now you've got all of these moms, hardly any of them go to Sozo Church. And she's reaching all of these moms in a unique way because of the grace on her life and then the Holy Spirit inspiring it. And here's what I'd like for you to walk away with. There is custom-made grace on your life. And you're not going to be a very good Joel or Lauren or Emily or John or Natalie. But you can be a really good you. And when you come into agreement with who God has made you to be, you're going to make an incredible impact everywhere you go. I remember when I first had the opportunity to preach. So I was about 20 years old. I had signed up to be on a team to move to England. So I was probably about a year into a 2-year commitment to help plant a church in Wolverhampton, England. We had this little church of a dozen or so people that was gathering in a little pub and on Sunday evenings, Sunday afternoons. And it was my turn to preach. But if you rewind my story back to being 5 years old, and it's December of my kindergarten year, and I am in the school play. And my role in the school play as a kindergartner is to be in the Christmas tree choir. I'm an ornament in the Christmas tree choir. Now, this would have been 1988. And so nobody recorded on cell phones. Everybody brought these big old cameras. And so I'm in the Christmas tree choir, and I look to the back of the audience, and there is this huge camera set up on a tripod. And I thought that the news was there to broadcast our play and my role in the Christmas tree choir. And I was absolutely paralyzed. I don't think I sang a word, which probably made the choir better. And from then on, I was terrified to be in front of people. And so now 15 years later, it's my turn to preach to 12 people. And I am probably in pre-service prayer all by myself, praying that Jesus will come back so that I don't have to preach. I'm like, it would be a really, really good time for you to show up, spare everybody. And so here's the interesting thing. I knew that I was supposed to, but I was absolutely terrified. Fast forward another 5 years, I'm about 25, and I'm leading a college ministry, or helping lead a college ministry at that point with a few hundred students, and I'd gone to this conference, and at this conference there was a guy named David Platt. David was about 5 years older than me, so still he looked younger than me. He looked baby-faced. I thought he was like 19 years old. he gets up and gives this phenomenal sermon. I mean, it's like, wow. Like, I wanted to give my life to Jesus all over again. And so then the next week, it's my turn to preach. And so I started preaching the exact same way that David preached, to the best of my ability. I go back and I sit down. Lauren, sitting next to me, she said, Joel, you're not a very good David. And it put me on this journey realizing, man, there is a unique grace on my life. Some of you would say, very unique. We've never seen anything like this before. And when I come into alignment with who God has created me to be, that's when heaven comes. And the same is true for you. When you say, you know what, this is who God has made me to be, and this is what it looks like for me to carry his glory, there's something significant that happens. And so I went on this journey of really finding my voice, right? And here's one of the things I realized. When I was first starting to preach or to public speak, I would write out all of my notes. And it would be like this script, and it would and I would try to bring people into this story and then help them have a big aha and all this stuff. And I realized it wasn't doing anything. It didn't touch people's lives. And then occasionally I'd kind of just sporadically go off the script that I had written for myself. And I would just be myself. And something would start to happen, and people would come, hey, when you said that thing, there's something that happened there. And I started to realize that the greatest authority in my life flows out of my authenticity. It's out of who God has created me to be. And I started having responsibility to preach more. And I realized I'm not a very good entertainer. I feel like Maximus on the Gladiator. He's slaughters all those guys and then throws his sword into the crowd and says, are you not entertained? It's this is just not entertaining. And I should stop trying to be entertaining because that's not doing it, right? But I realized if I'm just me following God and leading the way that he's called me to be, that it actually impacts people's lives. I'd like to suggest that the same is true for you. That there is something about the way that God has created you that carries his glory. You see, at the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he created the crowning piece of creation, humanity. He said, let us create man in our own image. You see, you were created to look like God. But he didn't stop there. He said, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to give the earth to them. That they would carry our image to cover the whole earth. And that they would do a few things. That they would be fruitful and multiply. In the natural, that looks like kids. In the spiritual, it looks like making disciples. They would be fruitful and multiply, that they would subdue the earth and fill it. Fill it with what? The glory of God. Well, the glory of God will only flow through your life to the extent that you come into alignment with who he's created you to be. You trying to be me will get you no glory. You trying to be your favorite whatever, even trying to be your parents or your friends, there's no glory in that. God has specifically made you to be you and let his glory shine through you in such a way that nobody in all of creation has ever experienced. And the world is needing you to be you, and not to take your light and hide it under a bucket, but to put it on a stand so that it would shine and it would give light to the whole world. That was a good amen from that baby. Perfect timing. And so I began to realize that there is this incredible journey of me learning what God's call is on my life. Let me make this maybe real simple as we understand call. We talk a lot about kingdom calling around here. Let me give you 3 pieces. One, it's key that we understand what our new creation nature is. Nature is not about you being unique. It's the foundation that is true about all of God's kids. Okay? So I'm a son. You're a son or a daughter. You have access to all that he has. You have been made holy. You are forgiven. You walk with God. You hear his voice. That's not unique. That's true about all of us. Okay? Then the second thing is our identity. And our identity is not what we do. It's who we are. It's the unique things about us. It's the ways that you and I uniquely reflect who God is. There are some ways that you find your identity, but let me just give you like really easy way is just to begin to talk to God. And then what's the impact that you have on the people around you? What do they say about you? You may even ask some folks like, what do you see about my life that's unique? How do I represent God? And then I would suggest pay attention to the prophetic words that you have had about your life. And that's one of the reasons why we have a high value on hearing God around here. That's why we have a prophetic ministry, or one of the reasons is because we believe that people need to hear God and that they need to understand what God says about them uniquely. And then the third piece is your calling. We call it our kingdom calling around here. And understanding your calling, it's what is true about your nature. It's also what's true about your identity. But it's then what does it look like when you put that into action? Because there's glory that comes when you come into alignment with putting that into action. Now, we don't ever want to be human doings. We're human beings, right? So we're not trying to get our identity out of what we do. Instead, what we do comes out of our identity. So here's what I would say to be true about me for my kingdom calling, is that I'm a pioneering father. Like I just know that's what God has called me to, is to pioneer and to father. It's what my role is in a lot of the people around me in their lives. That's what even the guys in Burundi and in Japan, it's like, I'm going to help. And here's what I know, is that when I live out of my kingdom calling, that the result is there's a specific, we started calling it this a couple weeks ago in our team meetings, there's a specific miracle grow that comes out of me living in alignment with my kingdom calling. So what happens is that as I live as a pioneering father, and I approach and treat people from that perspective, there's grace that flows out of my life that creates courageous love. And it's like, my goal is that when people around me is that they experience the love of God, that they're healed, that they're transformed, and then that they're given courage for the assignment that they're on. Steve walks in a very different grace. Now, that grace has had some of that same effect on my life, but man, he is a kingdom provocateur. And he provokes people to think differently about God, his goodness, and his work in their lives. And I've seen it really tick some people off, but I've seen it transform lives in such a way that has shaped who we are as a church family. How many of you have been impacted by Steve's kingdom provocateuring? Yeah. Now, here's what I know to be true about my life, is I'm not a very good kingdom provocateur. That I will make you mad and frustrate you. I won't help you rethink some things. And so I don't try to be Steve. Instead, I live with the grace that's on my life. And it's key that you and I begin to discover what that is and then how we walk in it. Go with me to 1 Samuel 17. You've heard this story before. This is the story of David and Goliath. So let me set the scene just in case you're forgetting the story. Israel has their enemies, the Philistines, and Israel is on one mountainside, Philistines are on the other, and they are ready for battle. But what the Philistines are proposing is that instead of one army against another, they do what's called man-to-man combat. It's one-on-one. And so Goliath is saying, hey, I'm going to fight your one person, and instead of all of us dying, one person will die. And whoever wins, the other army becomes the servants or the slaves of the conquering army because of that one-on-one battle. Goliath was a giant, right? That's where we get the term he's a Goliath, right? Stood incredibly 8-9 feet tall, had spear and a sword that you and I probably couldn't even pick up. And so Goliath was like this war hero. And so Goliath was the one they were sending. And there was a problem in Israel because nobody else wanted to go. Nobody would fight. And so you've got David, who's a teenage shepherd boy, and he's bringing some food to his brothers who are in the army. David's not even in the army. He hasn't even been recruited. Nobody has seen his skills in battle. David has, however, already been anointed as king. Not yet appointed, but anointed. So basically, Samuel came and gave him a prophetic word about what he was going to do in the future, that he was going to be king. And so David shows up to this scene to bring food to his brothers, and he hears Goliath taunting Israel. And that's frustrating to him. Here's what I'd like to say to you. One of the ways to find God's call on your life is to pay attention to what frustrates you. What I would call, and now there's a carnal frustration, but there's also a holy frustration. And there's something in your spirit that just doesn't set right. It means you're supposed to do something about it. Now, the key to not making a huge mess is finding out from God what it is you're supposed to do about it. And so David gets this holy frustration thing. He's like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? A little bit of extra information there. Who is, here's why it's relevant. He has no covenant with God. Who is taunting God in the army of God. And so he says, hey, if nobody else will go, I'll go. Now, remember this. David's already got the prophetic word that he'll be king. So two things must be true. One, to be king, you have to have a kingdom, right? And so if Israel loses to the Philistines, there's no kingdom to be had. Two, you also have to be alive. And so David's like, well, if I'm supposed to be king, then this guy can't take me out. Here's the interesting thing. The king of the day was a guy named Saul. Saul, it says, stood head and shoulders above everybody in Israel. If there was anybody who was meant to take on Goliath, it was actually Saul. It was his responsibility to defend his people. And the truth is that when we don't come into alignment with what God says and the assignment on our life, God will always send somebody else. And so David goes and he's like, hey, I'll fight him. His brothers get mad. He's like, who do you think that you are? When you start to have the aha go on in your head about God's call for your life, you will probably have some mockers, and they may even be familiar to you. They may even be related to you, and they start saying, who do you think you are to do that thing? Don't pay any attention to them. And so he goes, and finally, I think Saul's a little bit relieved that he's not going to have to fight. And so Saul meets with him, and that's where we'll pick up here in verse 38. It says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. And David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. So you've got Saul, who's about 6'6", 6'8". You've got David that is like average height, probably, 5'8", 5'10", somewhere in there. And Saul has put his armor onto David. Could you imagine? It's like Eli wearing my clothes around, my little 4-year-old son. Big old shoes just flopping around. David's like, that's not going to work. I can't handle that. I've got a question for you. Whose armor are you wearing? Whose armor are you wearing? Let me say this to you, church. So often, well-intending church leaders influenced by a spirit of religion will put their armor on you. Well-meaning parents, small group leaders, people discipling you will start to project their call onto you. And you'll pick it up and think, I need to be like that. I need to be an entertaining speaker. I need to be the one who is at everything. I need to be this. I need to be that. And it will not work for you. It's a sure way to get yourself slaughtered. David realizes that. He says, hey, I can't go in that way. I can't go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Instead of complicated weapons of warfare, David went with what he had been made comfortable with. Let me say this. There is a way that you were meant to fight. There's a way that you were meant to live that isn't full of all the religious baggage, and it's not somebody else's armor. It's you coming into alignment with who God has created you to be. It's you saying, you know what? This is how I represent God, and this is what he has put in my hand, and this is how he has graced me, and this is what his grace looks like on my life. And maybe it's not you starting a postpartum moms group. Right, Dave? That would be creepy. Don't get any ideas. Not your armor. But instead, pay attention to the stones that are in your hand. What is it that God has entrusted to you? You see, there's an enemy out there who would love to disqualify you from the purposes of God. Who would love to say, hey, for all of these reasons, you're disqualified. Oh, well, you're not married. God can't use you yet. Well, you don't have enough money, and you're not taken care of, and you don't have the resources to do that. Well, you don't know anything. Well, you this or that. You're not seminary educated. Blah, blah, all those things. We start recognizing all of those schemes of the enemy, all of those lies, when we recognize them for what they are and say, you know what? It's like Aurelie said, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. He's already qualified you because of Jesus. And he's saying, hey, now it's time for you to engage the world around you. And I just want you to know this is the heart of, for the next few weeks, what I'm saying probably over and over again. You are more ready than you realize. You don't need to be anybody else. There is grace that flows through your life when you come into alignment with God's call on your life. I love this verse. It's Ephesians 4:7. It's so simple. It's like one of those lines that we would just often read right past. It says, but to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. It's actually like makes it too simple. When you read it in the Greek, what you realize is that Jesus has given each of us grace that is custom made to who we are and the call that we have. Here's the challenge. David, stepping onto the battlefield with Goliath, it could look absolutely overwhelming. Here's the interesting thing about the David and Goliath story. David looked like the absolute underdog. In fact, that's the theme that we pick up from it, right? It's actually not true about the story. David was not an underdog. He was an underdog in a hand-to-hand fight. But he wasn't engaging in a hand-to-hand fight. He was slinging stones. And as a stone slinger, he was as skilled as they come. He was the favorite, actually. You're only an underdog in your story when you choose to fight the way that the enemy wants you to fight. But when you come into alignment with who God has made you to be, you're no longer an underdog, you're the favorite. And you're favored by him, and there's grace that flows through your life that will change the world, that'll turn the world upside down. And it may be one postpartum mom at a time, but it's going to turn the world upside down. Think about the legacy that'll flow out of these mamas experiencing God's grace through Aurelia's life. Right? Now you've got kids that have got prophetic words for their life. Their parents have probably never even heard of what a prophetic word is. And there's just incredible grace that flows when you say, you know what, that's who God's called me to be. And that's what I'm going to walk in. Fred, there's another layer on your life, man. I just feel like you're entering a season where God's going to take the lid off, and there's some stuff in your heart, and that because of the mess of the past, you've disqualified yourself. And God's saying, you are not disqualified. It's time to step into it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I just feel like God's got that for so many of you. You've begun to believe the lies of the enemy. You begin to think, you know what? Well, God can't use me because of this, this, and this. And what God's saying is, no, I've got incredible things for you. I've got incredible things for you. Let me say this to you. If you've got gray hair or no hair or dyed hair, it's not time to send you out to pasture. There is so much grace on your life, and we need you. You've got a story, and the very things that the enemy would want to say you're disqualified from are the very places that the mercy and grace of God has touched and that generations below you need to receive from. And let me talk to you young folks just for a second. There is incredible grace on your life. Like God's hand on your life is significant. And your age, lack of age, does not disqualify you. When you look at the disciples of Jesus who were accused of turning the world upside down, they weren't any older than you. And let me say this to you, that those of you that may be in a season of life like mine, you're raising kids, you're working, you've got so much going on that it feels like you have no time. There is grace on your life that flows when you do the things that you have to do, aware of who He is in you. So you may be absolutely busy and you think, oh, well, church, they're just asking me to do more. I don't want you to do a thing more. What I want for you to do is to pay attention to what God has already put you in and be a bright light in those places. Here's what I think will happen. If we really embrace this idea that there's custom-made grace for our lives, what I think is going to happen to us is that we are going to be seeing all sorts of things. It's like I said at the beginning of the year, come out of control. It's like there's this thing among teachers at one school where they're getting together early to pray because you as a teacher said, you know what? We need to do something about this. And then there's this other group of folks that are like, hey, if you live in a new neighborhood, just get on your Facebook group and say, hey, I live here and I'm going to have a Bible study at my house on Tuesday night. Watch the people that flock to that stuff. Maybe it's once a week you meet with your coworkers and say, hey, I'm just going to study the book of John. If you want to just hang out with me on the lunch break and begin to study. And you just watch what God does as he begins to put things in your path that are absolutely transformative. I was meeting with a business owner a few weeks ago. Or I've been meeting with him kind of ongoing. And a few weeks ago, he sent me a text. He said, hey, God gave me this word for one of my employees. And so I began to share it about direction for his life. He said, as I began to share it, he said, we just both began to cry. We both began to weep as God was unlocking things for his future. His employee didn't need a pastor. He needed a boss that was operating in the grace that was on his life. There is grace on your life to see the kingdom advance everywhere you go. Would you close your eyes? We're just going to listen to God together for a second. And the first question I want you to ask God is, God, am I wearing somebody else's armor? Am I trying to be somebody else? Would you show me what that is? Not used to leaning into hearing God's voice. His voice will sound a lot like yours. It'll be the first thing that you hear most of the time, but it will challenge you to faith and life transformation. You're hardwired from heaven to hear the voice of God. The second thing I want you to ask is, God, what's the grace on my life for this season? What would you have me do about it? God's looking for partners. Would you stand? Jesus, I thank you that you're raising up a people that look like you, that walk in the grace on their lives, that'll turn a city, a region, a world upside down. So, Lord, this morning we just receive what you have for us. Ministry team is going to be here to pray for people. If you need prayer this morning, I prayed for them in pre-service prayer just for an unusually deep prophetic edge. Maybe you're in a place where it's like, I just need a word from God. I just need to understand his grace on my life. I really believe that God may release that to you this morning. Also, if you just need prayer for something totally unrelated to what we're talking about, they would love to pray for you. One of the things, we sang that song, There's Another in the Fire, and my sense was pretty deep that there are people that you're in a fire of life and it feels like you're going through hell. And you just need somebody to pray with you and stand with you. These folks would love to do that. Finally, if you're here and you need to say, hey, I haven't given my life to Jesus. Like, I've been doing my own thing. I just need to trust him with my life. These folks would love to join you in prayer for that. Let's worship a little more and respond as God would have us.